Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
Ben Matlock.
And we're back.
Yeah. Woohoo.
A shortened, off season or off week for it's like when these, I don't know, any sporting event, I guess. I was trying to think of a good analogy there, but MLS is one and nobody but me watches it, so I can't use that. But anyway, yeah, we recorded late last week, so...
Yeah, the key word is a good analogy. If you're talking about soccer, you're already out of your depth.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I've had one day where I didn't have to work and I didn't have to do anything for this show since the last time we recorded, so that was a good day.
Those are the nice days. You sit back and you pretend life is normal and not stressful. And...
Not really. It really just turns every day off you have into a Sunday because you're always just thinking about, well, fuck, tomorrow I got to do this, and
right.
this. And
yeah, Sundays are the most bullshit of the weekend days out of all two of them. But
yeah, fuck
it's like,
Sundays.
oh, it's a day off, but half the day you're thinking about Monday. And then if you have a 9 to 5, like I do, Sunday's not really I think of a weekend as a day that I can go out and do whatever I want, but Sunday you have to be in bed by a normal hour anyway.
Yeah.
Well,
at least you have regular weekends. Us retail schmucks. All my days off are in the middle of the week, so every weekend feels like a Sunday.
So anyway, Non-Essential Podcast. That's why we're here. If this is your first time listening, each week we bring two distinctly different stories that the other, neither of us know what the other is going to talk about. It's not going to be weekends and retail hours.
It's coming together with whatever bullshit we managed to find in the past week.
As you like to put it, it's turning dicking around on the internet, just looking for interesting things and turning it into a podcast. So
and
that's what we do.
6 episodes down, we've done pretty well. So watch us fall apart here live on episode 7 now. My story this week is it's a bit of a slow burn. The thing is, I really want to talk about how this fucker I'm going to talk about died. But in order to do that, I kind of have to tell you how he lived a little bit.
So it's the interview of a vampire of the Non-Essential Podcast stories.
Right. Yeah, so buckle up. This will be 3 hours. No, this is about a Japanese author who he got really fixated on something, and I think as we can all relate to this fixation. Not really. That would be terrible. Anyway, let's just get into it. Kimitake Hirioka was a Japanese author born on January 14th, 1925. He's better known by his pseudonym Yukio Mishima.
Well, yeah, Yukio.
Yeah, the great Yukio. Yeah. At the age of 16, he published his first work, which was called Hanazakiri no Mori, which means the
overachieving asshole.
Which means the forest in full bloom. He turns out he's way better at writing than us. Which dealt with the lives of aristocrats from various points in Japanese history. It was published in a magazine. But because it was so well written, the editor suggested that he'd not use his real name or reveal his age. And that's where he came up with Yukio Mishima. Yukio is a derivative of the Japanese word for snow, and Mishima is a name of a town, I guess, in Japan that gives you a perfect view of Mount Fujiyama.
I don't like snowy mountains.
Yeah.
Who doesn't?
Yeah. So after he settled on that, he actually never really went by his birth name again. So he's always Mishima.
Well, in order to keep cashing your checks, you're stuck.
Well, I think he also just liked the idea of having something related to a real town or whatever. Under the care of his strict, overprotective grandmother, Natsuko, who was kind of the sickly, often miserable head of the household, which wasn't uncommon in Japan. It was always the grandmother who lived with the family and always seemed to have they were in control of everything. If you were the mom or the father, you didn't have as much say as the elderly.
Right. That's one of the interesting things about that, and a lot of cultures, but where in public, they always talked about, like, the male was the, the head of the whatever, and the men, kind of one of those traditionally, like, in public, only the men talk, and, like, the women only speak when spoken to type things. But really, the women were the ones running everything.
Right.
And again, that's a gross oversimplification. And
and there's kind of a stereotype to this whole thing of, like, oh, the fucking crotchety old Japanese grandmother who just is always bitching about shit and is domineering and stuff. But apparently that's how he grew up. Was mostly under her guidance. He wasn't allowed to play with dangerous toys or go outside and play with other kids if they were deemed too rough. And this led to him spending little time outside and turning to stories and fairy tales and stuff. That's kind of became his outlet, and he developed a fondness for stories about warriors and princes, often facing, some great insurmountable danger.
I kind of like where this is heading already.
So you have no fucking idea how this is really all about getting to the end, but it's like I said, it's the payoff only works if you know how fucked up this guy turned out to be. So as a sickly kid, always being reminded, he's frail and not to, go out and, do kid shit. And always being told that you're sick and something's wrong. He developed a fascination with death, and especially, like, the particularly dramatic and gory kind. And near the last few years of his grandmother's life, she would take him to the theater, and that introduced him to, like, kabuki and no drama, which became a big fixation for him in his literary work, specifically harakiri, which, as we all know, is ritual suicide via disembowelment. So this led to a really fucked up fascination with death, where he was, like, looking at pictures of deaths, drawing his own. He, like, split open skulls, disembowelment, soldiers being blown apart. Part of that's probably the theater. Part of that's probably he's also, you're getting into, like, World War II and like that culture. So, like, when World War I was, fresh in everyone's mind then.
Right. And that's what I was going to say. As curious back at that time, like, now you go to the internet. If you want to find dead bodies, like, ripped apart, you go to Google. Like,
right.
It's horrible, but you can. It's right. It's all right there. But back then, it would be I would imagine it'd be harder to procure such materials and not, like, have everybody in town, like, just...
Right.
Yeah.
It got fucking weird. And according to the book I'm reading all this off of, I don't know how true this is. This seems like something he just fucking made up. The book's called Madmen of History by Donald Hook. This is a real book that was on my shelf that I'm bringing to the table this week. But he claims that Mishima's first ejaculation came from viewing a reproduction of the painting Saint Sebastian, which shows a naked youth bound to a tree with 2 arrows lodged in his side and a third in his armpit. I don't know. I want, like, citations for that. There's none in the book. Like, he just says that shit. Like, I seriously doubt Mishima did an interview or something later on. It was like, I totally came to that.
I'm imagining he's talking to, like, the butcher at the deli, like, I'll take a pound of ham.
And have you seen that fucking hot picture? That's so...
By the way, that's the first time I came was looking at that.
You ever see Saint Sebastian? Oh man,
it's hot. Make sure you got tissue handy.
First there was Saint Sebastian, then there was Margot Robbie. With the sport after she died, Mishima still focused a lot on the literary side of his literary passions. He had the support of his mother with that, and not so much the support of his father, who was a government worker, wanted Mishima to, sort of do what typical dad shit, where it's like, we want you to have a set career, you go to college, you get into law or some shit.
Which a lot of times is viewed as wrong, like, hey, let your kid do their thing. But in this case, he might have been onto something, it seems like, dude, you're fucking weird. Like, why don't you go into accounting?
Right. But over the years, he grew into a very talented writer and despite all the frailty and sickness, he was actually a very healthy, athletic young man. Yet in 1945, when he was called into active duty for World War II, he actually had a fever that day for the examination. Seeing it as an opportunity to not go to war, he gave intentionally misleading answers, and they eventually concluded that he was unfit because he had a light case of tuberculosis.
Just a light case. Enough
to be like, yeah, you don't have to go to war. Oddly enough, despite he was actively trying not to go to war, this rejection actually offended him and became like the stimulus for, like, he developed a really strict bodybuilding program that he would adopt in his adult.
I kind of get that, though. That's like when you, because a lot of us are like, I know I'm personally like very like self-deprecating in my like humor and stuff, and you say something like, "Oh man, I'm so ugly," and then somebody's like, "Yeah, you really are." You're like, "Wait,
right." Like, I get it, but it's really funny to be like, wait, what do you mean I'm not fit for duty? I'm more fit for it than anyone. By the end of World War II, Mishima had thrown himself into a law studies degree in order to appease his father, and he eventually graduated and obtained a position in the Ministry of Finance. But all of his free time went into his writing, and by 1948, he actually achieved so much publishing success that he left that job at the ministry.
Good, because I was going to say the last thing in the world you want is a creative person that's talented and obsessed with death stuck in an office job.
Yeah. But a vast number of Mishima's works had death as the focus, usually by suicide. The characters were always young and virile, as Mishima hated the idea of a long life. In his mind, to die beautifully, you had to die young, and in his mind, that meant before 40. You know, we're going to fast forward a little bit because he publishes a lot of works and stuff. He gets kind of into acting and modeling and stuff. And, you know, he's having a pretty solid celebrity life going into adulthood, but he's fucking crazy. So it's all going to fall apart in a fucking it's like horrible way.
Japanese Gary Busey, it sounds like, except.
Yeah, a little bit. He also felt that death should be agonizing. That's why he was so hung up on harakiri, which is a death so painful that victims historically wanted to be finished off with a kaishaku, beheading.
Which is always interesting to me. It's like, oh, I've shamed this or that or whatever, and I'm going to kill myself by disembowelment. Oh, fuck, this hurts. Cut my head off.
Right.
Like...
So, like I said, he got into acting and modeling and was, he was taking care of himself. He was doing pretty well. But our quirky, death-obsessed friend felt he had another nationalistic calling as a military leader. Something I didn't really mention, but it did kind of start with his grandmother, is this hang-up he had with sort of the samurai outlook on life, where you did everything for the emperor and stuff, and it's very weird because as a writer he took a lot from a bunch of cultures or whatever, but he was super nationalistic about Japan and these old ideas. So he began training with a volunteer army of 250,000 men. They were called the Jietai. I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, but nothing new for our show. This motivated him to go to a Waseda University with the goal of swaying the students over there to join his own private army, which he was calling the Tatenokai.
Cool. Never any red flags when somebody wants to start their own private army.
Well, it's hilarious because he went to a very left-wing school and was like, hey, join my conservative army. The Tatenokai's goal was to, first and foremost, protect the emperor, a very samurai directive that it wasn't a coincidence for Mishima, and support the Jietai through guerrilla warfare during emergencies. Most of these liberal students were mostly just amused and had no interest in joining his dumb little army. But he would get a following by enlisting a group from a small-time conservative magazine who just loved his ideas and immediately agreed to swear an oath to Imperial Japan. They did a ceremony which consisted of cutting one's finger and dripping the blood into a cup and then signing the oath in blood. Mishima would then drink.
You know, like you do.
Yeah. Mishima would then drink from the cup and pass it around, and he fucking loved it. Like, he was adding salt to the blood and stuff. Like, he's fucking...
Well, you see, you gotta have your blood with a little salt around the lid.
Yeah.
Hell, let's get a lime, do some body shots.
Yeah, fuck it. Jello blood. Let's hit it. He loved it. Other people did not, with a lot of people apparently running out of the room immediately to vomit.
Yeah, no shit. Some guy is like, well,
yeah,
it sounds a little crazy, but I can get behind it. Now drink some blood. Oh, fuck, I left my oven on. I gotta go.
Yeah, and, like, he's, like, smiling with a big bloody fucking grin and shit. It was just weird and unnerving. He then made arrangements to train his new army with the provided support of the Jietai. They gave him guns, automobiles. Apparently it's really easy to start your own army.
Yeah, I did not realize that if, like, me and you want to start the non-essential army, we just, like, call up the government and be like, hey, look, can we borrow some guns and, like,
we'll team up with another fucking militia, and they'll see you as allies, I guess. Along the way, recruiting a few new members, notably a Masakatsu Morita, who intensely shared Mishima's imperialistic views and quickly became his right-hand man, despite the fact that the Tadanokai technically didn't actually have, like, a ranking system. He was just kind of the unofficial,
Well, yeah, that's because that's bullshit. Whenever anybody does that, like, nobody... It's like those companies that are like, oh, we don't like the word boss. We're all equals here.
Yeah.
It's like, well, then who do I ask for a day off? Well...
When really it's just labeling a dynamic that's already there.
Right.
There is speculation that between Morita and Mishima, there was a romantic connection. There's a lot in...
They found bloody arrows in the...
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot of references in Mishima's work that hints to his homosexuality. But I don't know if he ever actually admitted it in life. So it's all speculation, really. The one thing we know is that sexually he was into way weirder shit than just dudes.
Right.
It definitely went beyond any sort of, like, just preference, and, like,
You're into girls or guys? Well, it depends. Are they either of them alive?
I like them pierced by a volley of arrows. Either way, I'll take it. Either or.
What, you got one that was crushed by a catapult? Oh.
So yeah, they speculated there was a romantic connection, but the only thing we can be sure of was that Morita was a very important person in Mishima's life and in his death, which we're getting to. So what was the goal of the Tadanokai? They didn't really have one. It changed a lot. They were talking about staging a push and taking over Parliament with the aid of the Jietai, and then they were talking about attacking the Jietai.
We had this whole picnic luncheon, and they brought fucking potato salad. That's it. They're enemies now.
Yeah, it's like, well, we could do something with them, or we could fight them. What are we doing here? They were talking about kidnapping a senior officer and holding various other ones hostage. There were just tons of ideas, and none of them were grounded in any, like, logical, like, we're going to change something in this country, because it really was all just a long setup for what Mishima wanted to do his whole life, which was kill himself.
Well, yeah, and you need to raise your own army to do so.
Yeah, well, eventually they settled on a plan to hold a General Kantoshi Mishita hostage. They would force him to assemble his troops, and where Mishima would then give them a great speech that would win them over to the Tadanokai cause, and then Mishima and Morita would commit harakiri, fulfilling Mishima's life goal of dying a tragic hero in his mind.
But, okay. Like, I don't draw any connection. Like, a tragic hero dies, like, for some, like, deep reason and, like, meaning, not just.
But in his mind, this is a deep reason, because they're going to see what he's willing to sacrifice to get them to believe in his dumb fucking random militia. So I'm going to read directly from here on out, because the story, like, I can't do it justice by writing my own notes of it. Like, you kind of have to hear it for yourself, because the imagery here, like I said, Donald Hook here doesn't seem to cite a lot of his sources, but he does have a way of painting the image. So he always described it, before I get into it, like he always saw like these tragic deaths as like they had to be somewhat inappropriate. So they always called this day of the kidnapping the inappropriate incident. Because it's a fucking kidnapping into a suicide.
Yeah, I love that name.
And planned. All right. So, the day of the inappropriate incident, November 25th, 1970, was at hand. Mishima, in a Tadanokai uniform and carrying a briefcase containing various papers and 2 daggers, was wearing a 17th century Magaroku sword as he stepped out of his house at approximately 10:15 a.m. and strode toward a waiting car. In it sat his 4 Tadanokai co-plotters. Mishima sat down in the front seat and passed out envelopes containing a letter in which he took the blame for the incident. The envelopes also contained money for eventual legal fees. Mishima seemed to be in fine spirits and joked and sang all the way to Ichigaya. The group was waved through the gate at 10:50 and went directly to General Mashita's office. The general was most cordial and invited everyone to have a seat. He had been expecting them. The students took chairs along one wall, but Mishima remained standing in the center of the room in front of General Mashita's desk. He introduced the young men, explaining that he had very much wanted them to meet the general. He also said that Tadanokai were having their monthly meeting there at the base that day, and these men were to receive commendations for their helpfulness to the injured comrades while on a recent maneuver. The general expressed his congratulations and then commented on the sword which Mishima had just removed from his person and propped up against a chair. He said he was doubtful that it was legal to wear such a weapon, but that he admired it very much. At that remark, Mishima withdrew the sword from its scabbard and held it up for the general to see, calling at the same time for a handkerchief. This was a prearranged signal at which Chibikoga, one of the Tadanokai men, stepped in back of the general, choked him into submission, and gagged him with the handkerchief. The handkerchief was actually a tenugi, which is a towel used to wipe the grease and smudge from a sword. The others helped tie Mashita to his chair. Unknown to Mishima and his boys, Major Sawamoto, the general's aide, was in the hall and was watching what was happening through one of the opaque glass side door panels. Not understanding, but sensing that something was amiss, like you just saw your superior get choked out by a fucked up militia, he summoned his superior, Colonel Hara. Together they sought out General Yamazaki in the office next door. So basically he's just like, some fucking weird's happening, but I don't know what we should do. In a few minutes, groups of 5 to 7 officers and men started to come into Mashita's office through the 2 side doors connecting the adjoining rooms. Mishima and his group had clumsily secured the doors with wire and piled furniture up against them, but the barriers only served to slow up the angry soldiers. When they stepped over the furniture into the room, Mishima wounded several of them with his sword and threatened to kill Mashita if the men did not leave immediately. They saw that he was deadly serious. He demanded that the troops be assembled on the parade ground before 12 noon so that he might address them. At first the officers refused to comply, but when Mishima again threatened Mashita's life, the general ordered Colonel Yoshimatsu to carry out the order. Yoshimatsu did so, but he also called the police.
It seems funny to me, though, to have the military call the police.
Yeah, so. I completely didn't read that. That's hilarious. I like the cops are like, what are we going to do? You have just as many guns as we have.
30 seconds after the phone call, the military base phone rings. Hey, this is the police. We've got a situation going on with some soldiers.
Yeah. In the meantime, Mishima and his students donned their hachimaki, which with the rising sun and the slogan Shichizo Hokoku, which I guess means serve the nation for 7 lives, and waited for the crowd to gather. Mishima calmly smoked a cigarette and kept an eye on the soldiers watching him through the broken glass panel. At exactly 12 o'clock, Mishima and Morita climbed out of one of the windows at the end of the room leading onto a balcony on top of the portico which stretched over the main entrance to headquarters. Morita slung 2 long white banners containing statements of their objectives over the parapet and fastened them. Notice that it doesn't tell you what those actual objectives were because they probably didn't even know.
Yeah. Well, we think we'll get lunch after this and then maybe catch a movie. And...
Neither one of these fuckers are getting lunch. He then flung copies of their manifesto to the ever-increasing crowd of soldiers and curiosity seekers below. Mishima jumped up on the parapet and, legs apart and arms akimbo, began his speech, a rambling summary of the manifesto. He was wearing white gloves, another fetish of his, and they were blood-stained. The shouts and jeers drowned him out after the first sentence. Mishima called for silence and tried to be heard again, but the crowd was in a nasty mood. Individual remarks could occasionally be heard soaring upward. "Stop trying to be a hero," "asshole," "bakayaru," which filthy invective, "madmen," they called him. Mishima gave up after just 7 minutes. He had planned to speak for half an hour.
Just 7 minutes? 7 minutes is a long time when you're trying to shout over a crowd.
Well, he planned to speak for half an hour.
So, true.
But was thoroughly unnerved by his total rejection. Suddenly, in mid-sentence, he stopped his speech and shouted 3 times in defiance of the crowd, "Tenno Haikai Banzai, long live his imperial majesty." He then sprang down from the parapet, walked quickly across the balcony, and re-entered Mashita's office through the still open window. Marita was close behind him. "I don't even think they heard me," he muttered morosely. And just you can just feel everything falling apart. Already he was unbuttoning his tunic. He was not wearing an undershirt. He threw off his shoes, let his trousers drop to his knees, exposing his white loincloth, and took a seat cross-legged on the floor not more than 10 feet from General Mashita. Grabbing up his yoridoshi, a 12-inch dagger, he caressed his belly with his left hand, inhaled and exhaled several times, gave a cheer for the Emperor, set the point of the knife on his skin, and plunged the dagger deep into his abdomen. His face went deathly white. Blood ran from the wound down between his legs, staining the loincloth. As he began to slice to the right, his hand started to tremble violently. Gripping his right hand with his left, he shoved the knife across his stomach for a distance of half a foot. Marita was standing in back of Mishima with a raised sword. Mishima was groaning terribly and muttered a signal to Marita, but just as Marita swung to decapitate him, Mishima toppled over onto the carpet, and Marita's swipe only cleaved his back as the blade struck the floor. Again screamed Furukawa. Marita brought down the sword again, but missed the neck, hacking Mishima's body instead. Mishima was in dreadful agony. His intestines spilled onto the rug. Again, the students...
I'm so happy for him. He's getting exactly what he wanted.
No, he wanted... This is the fucked up... He wanted, like, that clean samurai...
Sure, but you're supposed to die in agony, and he's getting...
He's just getting whacked with a fucking katana. This time, Marita...
Oh, fuck, this is a Nerf sword. Sorry.
Again, the student shouted. This time, Marita hit the neck, but his hands were shaking, and the blow was not sufficient to sever the head from the body. At this point, Furukawa seized the sword and completed the task. Just like, fucking God, give it to me, you idiot. Mishima's head rolled away and blood spurted from his torso. The body jumped and twitched like that of a chicken whose neck had just been wrung. That seems a little unnecessary of a sentence. But okay, Donald. Marita said, "Pray for him." With tears running down their cheeks, the students bowed toward the bloody mess and prayed. In a moment, Marita had removed his tunic. Taking the uridoshi from his master's dead hand, he attempted to drive it home, but the blade did not penetrate very far, and made only a superficial wound. Furukawa was standing behind him with an upraised sword. Upon a nod from Marita, he gave a mighty whack, lifting Marita's head from his body. With a thump, it hit the floor and rolled towards Mishima's stump. Once again, the remaining students said a Buddhist prayer for their comrade, with the general joining in. He begged them to stop the bloodshed. But it was all over. They told him that Mishima had instructed them to live and speak out at the trial. The students covered Mishima's and Marita's torsos and placed their heads upright nearby. Together,
well, of course, you gotta...
With the general, they walked to the door and submitted to arrest. The world was shocked at this abominable deed. Why had so a successful man done this heinous thing? Author of 40 novels and more than 60 other shorter works, nominated 3 times for the Nobel Prize for Literature, actor, philosopher, sportsman, father of 2 young children, husband, it just did not make sense. The 17th century writer-philosopher Matsuo Bosho once said, "The white chrysanthemum, even when lifted to the eye, remains immaculate." Mishima would not have agreed. It had to be stained with blood. In Japan, white is the appropriate color for a funeral, when on the day following Mishima's death, a friend brought white roses to the house. Shizu gently chided her and told her she should have brought red ones for a celebration, for Kimitake had for once acted out of his own free will. For Mishima, blood was life, vitality. His last...
That's a hell of an outlook.
The whole thing's so fucking weird. His last note read, "Human life is limited, but I would like to live forever."
Well, it's in a terrible, awful way. It's good to hear that is it's as hard to kill yourself in that manner as I would imagine it, because you always see it depicted on TV, like they just put in the dagger and swipe left, and then they like keel over dead, or then
it's
like,
one of the most painful fucking ways to die, and when your guy fucks shit up.
Right.
That was his right hand man, and that's what made me pick it, was reading that and being like, this guy was so hung up on this beautiful, in his mind, beautiful, tragic death that he was just determined to get before he was 40, and like they botched it.
But that's what it's interesting to me that he seems so fixated on death and like studied it so much, and it sounds like he like to the point of like seeking out photographs and literature and I'm sure firsthand accounts. And like he still had no idea that actual death like this is messy as shit. Like I can't imagine anybody ever doing that as poetic as you see it in a movie. Like
I wonder if it's like if you don't have a lot of experience, like, you know, growing up, if you're sheltered, you don't get a lot of experience with like hurting yourself and shit.
That's true.
So like this fascination he got with death was completely fantasy based. Like he was totally like he was enamored with it, but he never actually felt real pain.
Right.
And that's probably
suffering. That's where I thought you were going to go. Like I'll give him this for as messed up as he was, and to go out that way, you have to be really fucked up. It didn't sound like he like ever got into the stereotypical like I'm going to torture dogs and
it was always like he really liked pain. Like he was enamored with pain like happening to him.
Right.
Yeah, that was his big fixation. So yeah, I mean the upside is he didn't become a fucking serial killer. The downside is like nobody was like, "Hey, you're way too into this."
I think I can say we've probably all thought about like what our preferred way, because you know it's impossible to go through life and not think about death at some point, because we're all going to die. And to think about ways that you're like, yeah, when I go, I want to go this way. That's not the way I want to go. Like, just
if you're
to make
planning
it clear to everybody.
Like, that's what I think is like he never really had much experience with pain, is because like if you wanted to do this right, the first thing is you can't fucking topple over after you stab yourself in the gut, and your guy's supposed to hit you like in the neck. But at the same time, I mean, it's also partially on Marita, because he fucking whiffed and just like took a chunk out of his back. Like it just seems like seppuku is already like one of the worst ways I think to die, and like for it to get botched like that seems a million times worse. Like I said, just getting whacked with a fucking katana while you're bleeding out is
yeah, I guess the silver lining there is he may or may not have even felt that by that point with his like disembowelment. And
I imagine the first one in the spine probably
yeah,
shut a lot of that shit down. But like just like like you could, the way that's written is so like you can tell like upon stabbing himself he was like, oh shit.
At least he had the like drive to like, it sounds like he paused, is like, oh fuck, well, better move this thing to the right.
Better fucking finish this out. Yeah, I don't like this at all. Yeah, so you know.
Yeah, no thanks. I'll take like a aneurysm in my sleep, please.
Yeah, my ideal way to die would be like in the Watchmen, where the fucking blue dude just like points at you and you just evaporate.
Yeah, that something like that, where you have no idea, like you don't feel anything, you don't realize it happened. It's just you're done.
Yeah, or I'd want to do like something really cool, like fucking straight up action movie shit. You know?
You like punch Hitler into a volcano and you
not like this. But... See, like that's the thing. He wanted like an action movie type or drama movie type
but, like,
thing.
He kind of forgot somebody that's as into like fantasy literature and as good of a writer as it sounds like he was, an actor, like he really missed the point where there has to be a climax and then the conclusion. Like, it sounded like he just so bad wanted the conclusion that it kind of sounds like if he went to McDonald's and they were out of Big Macs, he would have done it right there. Like anything to like,
yeah, like
we're going to kidnap this general for no specific reason with no specific intent. And then I'll kill myself to prove that we did this thing.
Yeah, it makes me curious, like, because I've never actually read anything by him. So, like, I'm wondering, like, does all this shit just, like, out of nowhere, does the main character just fucking kill themselves? Like, it's like, chapter 1, I went and had a bagel. Chapter 2, I plunged the knife deep inside. Like, yeah, so, I mean, it's not a, like, ha-ha-ha funny type story, but it's a very fucking weird, like...
Weird, yeah. Like, I guess I can get the, like, he had built up in his mind that he is this martyr and he had this important message, but it sounds like that's what I mean. Like, they always talk about it in writing. Like, we've both dabbled. And if you're not authentic, if you're not, you know, if you try to fake it, like you try to fake say you're writing a piece, a reaction piece, I mean, you're angry about something, but you're not really angry about it. You're just trying to fake that emotion.
Yeah.
You can pick up on that. And that's kind of what it sounds like happens here. Like, I'm just going to fake this deep, like, manifesto of beliefs, but
ultimately it's really all just trying to get to this thing that I've been hung up on since I was a child. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, that's me. That's a Yukio Mishima. I want to kind of read his shit now.
I'm more curious, like, how many of his followers tried to like continue on, like, for how long after his death, or were they just like looking at each other like, well, that was
something they talk
weird.
about was like the Todd Nokai. They had a member limit of 100. They would only let 100 people in. They never hit that limit. So, yeah, I can't. I'm sure it kind of just petered out. I bet a lot of people got tried, and convicted for this fucking stunt, and yeah, it was probably short lived. And they talked about it in the book, like with World War II kind of wrapping up. There wasn't really like a lot of. It's why, you know, leftists in Japan were like, fuck off, yeah, with all your shit, because we're busy trying to rebuild the country.
Right. Yeah, well, and I'm far from a Japanese history buff, but I do know that after World War II, like, part of the surrender, like, I imagine most of those militias got shut down by the Allied people anyway, like, even from, like, outside of Japan, because I know they came through and, like, did things as far as even rounding up swords and, like, seizing them because you couldn't have weapons. And if you can't have weapons, I imagine they frowned upon having a clandestine military forces. So I don't know. I'm sure all that kind of played into, and that's the funny thing is you have these beliefs and you have this weird thing, but you want to go out in this blaze of glory, and it really ultimately means nothing. And you end up, like, not really remembered for anything other than being, like, psycho.
Yeah. To be fair, like, one of his, like, novelistic autobiographies, I think it's called, like, Confessions of a Mask or something. Apparently that's, like, one of still, like, a really highly acclaimed book. Yeah. But yeah, totally. This is a case of, like, when the author kind of goes beyond, like, their fucked upness goes beyond the quality of anything they've ever written.
And it was a perfect storm for that. Like you said, the grandmother and the sheltering growing up, that never ends well, ironically. If you're a parent out there and you're protecting your kid, just know that you're really driving them to be extra crazy later in life. Yeah,
because at some point they have to meet the world, you know?
Right. And by then they're way behind everybody else. So there was that, but then on top of that, then when you do get out in the world, being a accomplished, famous celebrity, basically, then you're not treated normal either. Like,
right.
Dude probably never had a normal day in his life.
Yeah.
But
apparently talented as shit, though. So, you know, hey, good on you for not killing anyone else. Except Marita, but it looks like they were...
Well, yeah.
Marita was a fucking adult. He made his choice, too.
Right. I mean, he didn't physically kill him. He devised the plan with him, but ultimately, Marita's thing.
Then again, if you see it more as like a cult leader thing, then, whatever. Yeah. Whatever. It was fucked up. This is one of those things where I was like reading it. I was like, I don't know how funny this will be, but maybe it's time for an episode where listeners are just like, well, that was fucked.
Mine's messed up, but on a much less grotesque murder death scale. So
I win this week, is what you're saying? I win the murder trophy.
Damn it. John Ernst Whirl Keely. Anybody with 4 names is always going to be a great story.
His second name was Ernst?
Ernst, not Ernest. Ernst. And it starts off so fucking normal, like John. You're like, yeah, John, I know 1,000 Johns. And it's Ernst Whirl Keely. What the fuck? Anyway, he was born in Philadelphia in 1837. As a young adult, he held various jobs: painter, mechanic, theatrical opera member. I don't know if it's singer, actor, like stagehand. It doesn't say. Carnival baker, which I like to think is like baking carnival people, but I assume they mean like making treats at carnivals.
Yeah.
But the usual stuff that one does to earn a living. But in his spare time, he was an inventor. I typed 1972 because I'm an idiot. 1872. He wasn't 135. He was 35 years old. He invited various scientists to his lab to witness a demonstration of his new machine. The machine, Keely claimed, could harness the power of a as yet unknown force driven by ether. Because, ether's awesome.
Hell yeah, it is. I'm on it right now.
Yeah, right. The machine used tuning forks that were said to be able to vibrate in such a way to convert water and air into ether that acted basically like super steam. Like, it would build up pressure like steam or compressed air, but it was ether, so it was not ether, but ether, I guess. But anyway, so he invited these scientists over to see the demonstration. And because people in the 1800s believed in magic as long as you called it science, people got so excited by his invention that they went out and they formed the Keely Motor Company and raised a capital of $5 million, which back then was the equivalent of $95 million today. And this was a weird thing. It took a while for me to wrap my head around this, like as I was reading through all this. The Keely Motor Company wasn't his company. It's like they formed this conglomerate around his idea, and then they paid him to produce his stuff. Anyway, so November 10th of 1974, he demonstrated a device he called the etheric generator. He blew into a nozzle for 30 seconds and then poured 5 gallons of tap water into the same nozzle. And then after some adjustments, the pressure gauge jumped up to 10,000 psi. He said that this was proof that the water had been vaporized into ether. Or ether. I keep saying that wrong.
I always thought it was ether.
Ether, yeah. And then that one I wrote as ether because I was hurried when I wrote my notes. But anyway, but that's what he said happened, is that this machine and the vibrating of the tuning forks and whatever had turned just regular water and regular air into ether. Basically what he was claiming is back in the late 1800s, science actually believed ether was this state of matter that they were just hadn't been able to harness or detect yet, but it obviously existed because things like light waves and whatever couldn't pass through empty space, so there must be something there that light's passing through, and they explain that with ether. It comes closest to actually the idea of the power you generate from splitting an atom. It's this sub stuff, and if you can separate it from the water and the air, all of a sudden you have this super energy. He went on to give a couple more subsequent demonstrations, but it was funny because every time he would demonstrate it, he would call it something different. And started off with it as a etheric or etheric generator, and then he called it a vibratory generator, which sounds kind of naughty. Then he went with hydropneumatic pulsating vacuum engine. I can see why the marketing folks would have convinced him to change that. And then it ended up as a quadruple negative harmonics. So I really am sad that I didn't grow up in a time where you could just make up words and call it science. 1875, the New York Times reported that his invention, or reported on his invention, stating that it could turn cold water and air to ether and produce up to 2,000 psi in 2 minutes, which apparently back then was a pretty substantial thing. It also said that Keely would not disclose how his machine worked until he had a patent in every country in which patents were available, which is a pretty fucking convenient excuse when somebody asks you how your machine works. You say, well, I could certainly tell you, but not until I've got all these patents from across the world. Back around that time, John Keely met with a wealthy widower named Clara Jessup Bloomfield Moore, another four fucking name. I hate people from the 1800s. Anyway.
John Taft, Howard Taft, John.
Anyway, Clara was like I said, a wealthy widower. So, as you know, pure chance, I'm sure that John Keely came into her circle, who was a patron of the arts, but she liked science. I bet she followed the I fucking loveth science by Jove, YouTube channel. Clara gave Keely $10,000 as just seed money, and then paid him a monthly like salary of $250. And I didn't write down the conversions, but that's something like $94,000 down and like $2,000 a month, so that he could focus on the perfection of his motor, which is kind of what I thought his job was already. So I don't know if they mean without being interfered with by the company, like the pesky company that's asking him like, hey dude, where's this motor?
What the fuck are you talking about ever?
Right. So in December of 1981, the stockholders of his company, or the board basically, they brought a lawsuit against him stating that he had been overly secretive. He had told them like a year prior that the engine had been perfected, but they still hadn't seen it yet. And he told him that the multiplicator was also nearing perfection. Like, that should be a fucking red flag, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, the engine's ready, but I can't show it to you yet, okay? I'm working on the multiplicator. Yeah, that's what it's called.
The product exists, but only when you're asleep.
They complained that for 10 years, any serious attempt at investigation had been met with deception and misrepresentation. No shit. They argued that Keely should at least have a confidant who, in the case of Keely's death or whatever, would be able to continue the work. Because they've put all this fucking money into this, and then he's like, I can't tell anybody how this works. So you'd have to be getting a little nervous. But apparently they're idiots. So what they were actually nervous about is not that this thing didn't exist, but that he would die and nobody would know how to work it.
So, Keely, I mean, that's a fair point if there was anything to base it off of.
Right, but you'd think that the other concern would be the bigger concern. He argued that he could not be made to expose that which no one knew but himself, and which was hidden in his own brain. That was like his quote, and they apparently were like, well, yeah, I can see that.
All right, that's fair.
I don't even know what you're fucking talking about. So, eventually Keely admitted that thus far he'd been unable to bring his inventions into practical use, but only due to the nature of etheric force. And, you know, it's a tricky thing, and I get it, and I know how to make it work, but it's hard to explain, blah, blah, blah. But he was still sure he'd succeed eventually. And so the company at this point was like, well, fine, but we're appointing this William Bokel. He only has 2 names, so that's a good start. But
so he must be a foil.
We're appointing him to be instructed in the use and construction of these inventions. So Bokel went and, to the lab and spent some time with Keely, and he reports back to the board that the inventions did indeed work, and that Keely really had discovered everything that he claimed, but it would be improper for him or for Keely to describe the machine at this point.
Jesus fuck.
Mm-hmm. But the board was like, oh, well, as long as our appointed independent person says this, let's keep working on it.
I just imagine them just sitting around eating pizza and being like, oh, shit, I got a meeting. I got to go tell them that we're working.
Right. Like, apparently it didn't cross their mind. And I don't know if this is what I'm injecting into it, but this would be my first thought, I would hope, that this guy came back from this inventor who hasn't shown us shit's lab after months. And we know this inventor has access to all sorts of money. And the guy comes back, it's like, yep, nope, everything's above board, but I can't really tell you why. I'd be like, wait, are you paid off too?
Jesus fucking Christ. we hired you specifically so you could tell us why.
Why? The one thing we hired you to do, you say you can't do, but they were satisfied by his answer because they're idiots. So in August of 1893, which is the following year, the board meeting was called to announce that the machine should be ready by the first week of September, which would be the following week, and that the board would inspect the machine on the 29th of August, which would be the following day. So I don't know why they didn't just say, we'll inspect it tomorrow. Like, we're recording on the 19th. Wouldn't it be weird for me to say, hey, Ben, on the 20th, we're going to...
On the morrow, we're going to do an inspection.
So when the morrow came and it was time for the inspection, all of a sudden Keely said the machine wouldn't be ready for another 6 weeks. Shocking.
I'm going to fucking just bash my head into the wall. Like,
what I love is at this point, he's had all these excuses, but they were not even good excuses. It's just like, oh, no, yeah, the... combobulator, it needs some twerking, and
like the patience these guys have is ungodly, because it's like for me it's like the second time they say like we can't really talk about it yet, I would be like, okay, look, you're gonna tell me how this thing works or I'm gonna cut your budget and I'm going to kill you.
So when they meet on August 29th, he says it will be ready in 6 weeks. So by October 29th, which if you're good at math is more than 6 weeks, they still haven't been able to see this machine. So they start discussing another lawsuit against Keely. And Keely, knowing this is going on, sends them a letter explaining that he is currently working to build a containment tank under the street, which has caused this latest delay. And the board found this explanation very satisfactory. Because they're fucking dumb.
Man, fuck the board. They deserve all of this.
So, on December 12th, which is presumably after he told them, and what I don't get to is at this point, Keely keeps leading, and he's like, oh, give me like 4 more days. Oh, give me another week. And then, as a professional procrastinator myself, I know you don't set those targets so close, because then you have to keep pushing them back.
Right.
But whatever. It doesn't tell me, he never gave an exact date for when this tank would be finished. But by December 12th, they were meeting again. So he sent them another letter that says he sees no reason why he shouldn't be able to demonstrate his motor in another 2 months. And that they should reschedule for February 1st. So by this point, some of the board members were less than happy about this. And they decided that for the next 2 months, they would give him his 2 months, but he was not going to be paid for the next 60 days. Like, what a strong stance to take at this point.
Put your foot down. He's already taken all your shit.
So 2 months goes by, and February 1st arrives, and the stockholders are reconvened per Keely's request, and he finally had something to show them. That something was another letter saying he needed to delay the meeting.
I'm going to put him through a wall. Like, what the fuck?
So that's February 1st. On March 25th, like almost 2 months later, he reported that the vibratory engine was complete and work to adjust and focalize. What the fuck is focalize? It was progressing rapidly, so he could finally demonstrate the engine on or before April 10th.
Yeah, I'm going back to Mishima and just thinking the wrong dude died.
So on June 6th, he said he'd be able to show it off by April 10th. On June 6th of 1885, which was 2 months and 2 years later than he said he would show it to them, he finally invited a group of 20 witnesses to his lab for a demonstration of his motor.
When they arrived, there was a letter on the table.
It said, oh, I'm sorry. My mother got sick. I had to leave town.
Had to take a big poop. Be right back. And then he never came back.
So he's finally ready to demonstrate his latest motor. And out of these 20 people, like some of them were board members, some of them were reporters, some of them were scientists, whatever. He had a good mix, and he actually invited them there. One of the reporters asked to see what was inside the machine, but he said, nah, no thanks. That would take too long to show you. So instead he just fired it up. And apparently this machine ran by drawing a violin bow across affixed tuning forks. And then he opened a valve and the crowd could hear the sound of escaping pressure. Etheric vapor, he assured them, not condensed air or any other form of vapor. I don't know how you prove that. It's just you hear a whoosh, and you're like, yep, magic. It happened right there. You saw it. He proceeded to use this etheric force to power machines that lifted heavy weights. He claimed that the machine could produce up to 22,000 psi. And then there was another device in the room that he demonstrated. They described it as a globe suspended upon an axle, which could be affixed in such a manner as to cut wood. So if you're having a hard time picturing that, I did too. Like I fucking spent way too much time thinking about like a sphere on an axle cutting wood. But I think I can kind of get an idea what they're talking. I assume the sphere had like teeth on it. It was basically a big power saw. I don't know. But anyway,
all I know is that this thing was a big fucking waste of time and money.
Right. A journalist asked him how long the machine could run for, presumably off the amount of water that he put into it. And he proudly boasted it could run for 40 days. The reporter, I assume the reporter didn't want to sit there for 40 days. He said, well, how about you just run it for 30 minutes? You don't need to cut wood, just like let it spin for 30 minutes. And Keely obliged. The thing ran almost for 15 minutes before running out of steam. And like they said, it was slowing down the whole time. You could like see it. It wasn't like it ran and then it's like, oh no, the gears got jammed. It was whatever.
It's perpetual energy. It'll go on forever. And
it seems though to me like that they didn't specifically talk about this, but these board members must have been so damn excited just to see something that they were like, cool. Yeah, he's got machines and they work.
Yeah.
In March of 1886, he demonstrated the device to a team of scientists. He put in about 16 ounces of water and was able to generate 2,700 psi. And then he was able to double that pressure by putting more water in. And he said that that's the same principle that he was using on his new motor that he was working on, and that it would be able to generate up to 25,000 horsepower, which I imagine in 1886 was a fucking lot of horsepower. It seems like it is to me, because that's... But anyway, what do I know? I'm not a machine person.
I can count up to that many horses, and that's a lot.
So in December of the following year, which was about a year and a half after that demonstration, the Keely Motor Company stockholders called another meeting. Keely didn't attend this meeting, but he did send them like a written summation, like bullet points of his work.
I need more time.
More time. Well, he sent a bullet. He wanted. Apparently, he was boastful. He was like, "Well, since 1882, here's all the things I've been able to accomplish." Oh, and by the way, I'm going to announce that I'm abandoning etheric force in favor of a new force that I've discovered, which I've dubbed vibratory symphony. The company's shareholders were completely confident in Keely and his inventions because they're fucking idiots. Like, wouldn't you be worried after over a decade of being blown off and like never really getting a payoff for this one like force that he says he not only like discovered but harnessed? You get no payoff, and then he's like, oh, by the way, that force was great and all, and I never really put it to the potential I said it could have, but I've discovered this new thing that it's not completely made up, I promise. But so that was 87. In the following year, he was once again sued, but this time it wasn't his own company. It was a Bennett C. Wilson. So apparently in 1863, which was way before any of this stuff started, Keely had agreed to a deal that said in exchange for funding, tools, and materials, this Bennett Wilson would own half of anything that Keely patented.
What a fucking bad deal.
Right.
What a moron. Holy shit.
But you got to figure 63, I think that puts him at about 22, 23, and he wants to be an inventor. So he's like, you can picture this young kid that's just like, oh, you've got money and materials and I can like play with all this shit. It's like, sure, yeah, fuck, have half of whatever.
I could build Good so deal. Much stuff if Good I deal. Just had a hammer and 3 nails. I want half.
And he agreed to it. Yeah. But then apparently he hadn't told him about anything. And this Bennett Wilson found out about his like supposed motor and all this, and he was also kind of a little pissed that because the deal said he got half of anything that this guy patented, but this guy never fucking put anything out. So he's doing all this inventing, and he's getting paid by the Keely Motor Company. But Wilson's not seeing anything, so he sued. It just what it really led to was another like series of lawsuits where the court was trying to say you need to show us how this machine works, and of course a series of excuses from Keely as to why he couldn't possibly do that. But this time the court was having none of that shit, so they arrested and jailed him for contempt of court on November 17th of 1888. Finally. But then he was released 3 days later on bail, and in February of the following year, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court overturned the initial ruling, saying that it's quite premature for the court to require Keely to explain his machines. So I guess like 17 years.
What the fuck is going on? Like, why does nobody want to know what the fuck this dude is doing?
I loved their specific wording is that that's a premature action.
It's like, been decades.
Slow your roll, right?
Nobody knows what the fuck this dude has been up to for decades. Like, somebody please just get him to answer a fucking question. What are you doing in your garage?
Well, good news. In March, Keely's counsel, so his lawyer, who was I guess involved now because of all these lawsuits, announced that Keely had found the missing piece. It's a hollow brass ring. I like to think that this guy has this magic machine, and it took him 2 decades, and it's like, you know what might work? Hollow brass ring. Apparently, though, it needed some, and then these words I made up because they fit with the excuses he's given. But he figured out what he needs, but it needs some adjustinization and tunification and whatnot. But he saw no reason that why he shouldn't be able to show the motor in just a few weeks, because he's never said that before.
Yeah. I'm just not ready to talk about it yet.
Not yet, but in a couple weeks. Give me a couple weeks. So December comes, which is more than a few weeks from March.
Give me a couple of weeks to properly word this letter that says I'll need another couple of weeks.
Couple weeks, right. The board meets again in December, and Keely tells them that the work tuning the motor has taken longer than anticipated.
I fucking hate him so much.
But also that the problems were mostly caused by the trouble he's had working with the board members and the directors. There was no actual physical obstacles. He saw no reason why. In other words, like, there's nothing not working. It's just taking longer, but it's kind of your guys' fault because you keep bugging me. And he said he would need a protracted length of time to finish this motor.
How long do you have to put up with this before you're legally allowed to beat him to death?
Right?
Because if I went this long, like if I owned a fucking company or something and a worker did this shit to me and then tried to blame me for the delays.
I love that.
I would be in
jail. How ballsy is that? Like,
I would be in jail.
Look, I know I've told you 30 times before that it's almost done and it's still not done, but it's kind of your guys' fault. I love that. But he said he'd need a protracted length of time, but he did promise him that once it was done, and it would definitely be done, that people would be immediately wanting to order one or more of them. And they believed him because they're fucking dumb.
By golly. One or more, you say? It's going to be in every home in town.
That was a great impression. I love it. So by the late 80s, early 1890s, this Miss Bloomfield Moore re-enters the... She never really left, but she had gone
She's
to
always
Europe.
Been watching.
Been paying him. They were close friends there, and unlike your story, there I never came across anything that like suggested any like romantic entanglement. They were just friends, and mostly it seems like she wanted to be part of this like well-known inventor like circle and be like, look, I'm the wealthy financier. And he was just like, look at this dumb woman that keeps giving me money for nothing. Like that's kind of my impression of it. Not like a romantic thing, but anyway,
she was
comes
trying
back,
to just hitch to that wagon, you know? Like,
right. And she comes back into the picture a little more prominently because she's back from Europe, something to do with some lawsuits that were, it said kind of loosely tied to this stuff, but more to do with her ex-husband's estate. So I don't want to know. Probably the ex-husband's family like pissed that she's giving all his money to this guy.
Yeah.
To Keely. But anyway, so she's back in the picture, and once she comes back, also you start to get a lot more like buying and selling of like stock in his company, and like portions of the patents and those kind of promises are a lot more like moving of assets that way. And it seemed to me, I got the impression that she had a lot to do with that too, behind the scenes. But of course, the more that stuff goes on, the more people were calling for demonstrations and investigations. And by this point, he had stuff to show off. We'll put it that way. So he was allowing some demonstrations and investigations, but most of these were met with intense skepticism, with many people pointing out that all the apparatuses appeared to run solely on compressed air, although they did say some of them seemed to employ some other unseen force, which I like to picture two different sides to that. They're saying unseen force, like there's some trickery, and he's saying unseen force, and he's going, vibratory symphony, bitches. Like, there's the magic.
That's bullshit. You have a ghost in there.
But perplexingly, there were still people who called themselves scientists and engineers who totally bought into his inventions because they're dumb.
I fucking hate it. I really fucking hate everyone involved.
You'll like the next line, because in 1898, Keely died of pneumonia at the age of 61. So not like
he was getting ready to die from pneumonia. He told the doctor, I need another 2 weeks to properly die from pneumonia.
Right. Maybe the doctor was sick of his shit, and they're like, oh, well, we'll give you the medicine, but I need another 2 weeks to procure it. Oh, fuck, you died. So, of course, as soon as he died, everybody's like, oh, that's sad. How did this shit work?
Maybe we should have had him write it down.
Yeah.
Like,
well,
legally.
the Philadelphia Press, which I don't, it was written in a way that I don't think it means just the general press in Philadelphia, but that was the, like, name of a publication in Philadelphia. It might still be, because fucking newspapers stick around forever. Yeah. But the Philadelphia Press was eager to look inside his workshop and determine whether or not he was a scientific genius once and for all. Hint he's not. What they found over the course of a week-long investigation was nothing short of amazingly exactly what you'd expect.
They found an accordion and a box of donuts.
And a monkey.
And a monkey.
Hidden behind one of the lab's brick walls was a series of belts and pulleys, and 2 floors below the lab was a noiseless water motor. That's how they put it. And at first, it's easy to see that and be like, wait, isn't that what he said he was inventing? But what I think that they actually mean by that is not his, like, magic machine that runs on water, but like a water pump, like a well-known at the time piece of equipment, a normal piece of equipment. And I didn't feel like figuring out how they work, but it compresses air, basically. They'd use the force of water to compress air. And so he had a big, like, 30-gallon or something huge, like, compressed air tank in the basement, too. And there was a series of, like, tubes and stuff running through basically fucking everything. Through the walls, through the floors, like, up the joists. They were all hidden and running. So the Philadelphia Press reported that this machine is and always was a hoax, running on nothing more than regular old compressed air.
And all his time, the only thing he actually invented was the water noodle.
Well, you got to give it to them, though. The dude apparently knew how to build shit, because he built all this, but he built fake shit.
Yeah, give me 20 years, I can build fucking bullshit.
Yeah, and like
too.
an endless supply of funds, apparently. But so as you can imagine, this report comes out, and the Keely Motor Company, whose board members have been waiting decades for concrete answers, like say, as you can imagine, they were keen to put out a statement. They insisted that the tubes were from Keely's earlier ether-based motors because they needed a way to convey the etheric force. Because after all, he never said ether was like magic. It was just like compressed air or steam, but more powerful. So obviously there were tubes. That's what ran the ether.
Yeah.
The wiring and the tubes that look like wiring in the floor, well, that was nothing more than an old burglar alarm system that had been disconnected. So they're that fucking dumb that at this point this guy dies, produces nothing, never explains anything. You get in and can see how he hoaxed it all, and they're like, nope. It's true.
Oh my fuck. Like,
so
Jesus.
That kind of tells you, I don't know the name of it because I'm not a psychologist, but as people, we tend to do this. The more you pay into something, it's how a lot of these phone scams current day work. Like the ones that call, they tend to like target elderly people, but it can be anybody. And they start off with, oh, you won $10 million, but we need $100 to transfer the money. And you think, who's dumb enough to fall for that? But people do. But the problem is, once you give them $100, it makes you more likely to like continue to give them money because you feel like, oh fuck, at this point, like, it's twofold. At this point, you've invested. Right, exactly. And you don't want to feel like an idiot. So apparently that goes so far that over like 4 decades, I guess 3 decades, this company invests, I don't know how much total, but the startup costs were almost $100 million. And then it gets so deep that they're like, yep, this guy that we suspected was a fraud all along. And he turns out was a fraud. Nope. He had a motor, but we'll never know how it works. So
they could have. That's enough money, especially at that time. It would be enough money now. That's enough money to change the world. like you could put it to fucking any other worthwhile cause, and you would make a huge dent in some global problem.
And you know what else had to play into it, although they didn't talk about this hardly at all, other than at one point, Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla were both invited out to like see demonstrations of this motor, and they both declined. It said for various but like unlisted reasons. And I'm like, because they were actual fucking scientists, like inventors, like. And they knew that there was no way that that stunt would end well for them at all. Like there was nothing in it for them.
Yeah, why would?
But anyway,
my point is their credibility.
Right. So, but my point is, at that time, this was the time of Edison and Tesla and all that, and these people scrambling for, delivered power to households was a shaping thing. And so people were so eager to be the company that brings the best and like most cost effective power, whatever supply.
Right.
That it sounds like a whole bunch of idiots in Philadelphia fell for this. Like, and the mind blowing thing to me is when this started, the guy was 35 and I'm 36. So that's somebody like my age that just bilks people into like, with nothing more than like, I have one of those like, weed killer sprayers. If you've ever seen like the little pump things that you pump up, and I pump one up in front of somebody and I spray it and be like, I bet you think that that's compressed air, but it's really ether. Do you want to give me $100 million?
Put it to your nose and
that kind of makes me wonder if this whole fucking thing, if this guy's whole life, or at least the whole like second half, his whole adult life, was like a joke that went too far, and then he's like, fuck, like, how do I not go to jail? Well, I'll just tell him I need a couple more weeks for 30 years.
Yeah.
And it worked.
That is probably the best way to scam, is to just like keep it going until you die. And then like, because if you wait and let yourself get found out, then you have to deal with the consequences. This guy played it perfectly.
Sort of. Like it should have never worked. That's the thing. It wasn't like he had a genius angle.
The thing about any con is like, know your mark. And he knew his fucking mark. Like these people, like we talked about it, like we just said, like I would fucking kill him. I would not make it very long before I did. But like these people would be like, well, he is a genius. We better let him work.
Right. And leading up to the end, you kind of wonder, like, does this guy actually believe it? Like, does he think he's inventing something? Like, maybe he's really just inventing an overly complicated air compressor and he thinks he's a genius. But by the end, when you can tell it was an obvious, like, dude.
Shit, I need moving parts to make this. Yeah, like, I need 2 weeks to figure out how to construct something that's believable enough to be bullshit.
Exactly. Like if it went to my last explanation there, where he thinks he's inventing something and he's not. Well, he sure as hell wouldn't hide half of it behind a brick wall and the other half in the basement. Like, the simple act of hiding all this shit tells you he knew the whole fucking time that it was bullshit. I did make a little side note that in 1884, he, for the military, demonstrated a vaporic gun, is what he called it. It sounds like a little cannon. And not exactly what it is. It's some kind of barrel and receiver. And he had these like canisters of what he called ether, and he'd put them in, and he'd hit the canister with a hammer to vibrate it, because that's what made the magic happen. And then turn a valve, and it actually shot these cannonballs like 300 yards, and they measured the velocity, and they shot them through these thick wood planks, and it sounds like it performed pretty fucking good as a cannon, except for one of the military people that watched it was like, yeah, I can do that exact same thing with compressed air. That's just compressed air. Like,
right.
Somebody at the time knew exactly what he was doing, and you would hope that like other people would have like paid attention to that. But it sounds like the military didn't, this guy didn't make this big crusade like this anti-doctor guy last week with Goat Balls, man. Yeah. But he wasn't out to bait. He's just like, nope, that's just compressed air. But like nobody paid attention.
Now I have shit to do.
Right.
I'll be on my way.
Because I'm in the fucking military and I have an actual job.
Yeah.
See you later, hippie.
I mean, that was the time, though. You said it yourself, like, you were talking about fucking Edison and Tesla and stuff, and like people back then were half expecting like Tesla to just like be literally riding lightning over their houses at some point.
Yeehaw!
Yeah,
Here's
like
your electricity.
Like a goddamn Spider-Man villain.
Yeah, I mean, and it covered everything. There was that. There was like, oh, Tesla's going to have this magic electricity that goes through the air, which kind of, we could do a whole show on Tesla. But, and then you had Edison with his stuff, and then fucking people thought you'd be like having electricity delivered to you like the fucking milkman. Like, nobody knew what was going on. They just knew they were discovering stuff.
Yeah.
But, so yeah, I mean, it was prime time for duping people. Like,
yeah. Just there's so much fucking money. I hate it.
The cool thing is his machine. You can still see. They still have it in Philadelphia. I didn't write down the name of the museum, but like it's still there. You can go see it.
Or you can go to the dollar store and build the same shit, probably, because he didn't actually make anything worth a fuck.
When you the side note on the vaporic gun and that it actually worked, but it was a fucking MythBusters of like 1884. Like I've watched MythBusters build compressed air cannons like a million times.
Yeah,
and he did it, and it's like etheric magic. Like I've seen pictures of the guy, so I know what he looks like, but I prefer to picture him as like David Blaine with a heavy like eyeliner and like waving the fingers at everything. Like it's magic.
Hey, you guys want to see some ether? Just like straight fucking ether.
And that was the perfect vehicle for him because, like I said, at the time he didn't invent the idea of ether. That was out there already. But it's kind of like the God particle is to us now, or dark matter is to us now, where we're like, yeah, well, it's out there, but the problem is we just know it's there. You can't measure it, you can't see it, you can't manipulate it, and that's
you
definitely
literally can't come here to investigate it. I'm working.
Right.
3 months. Come back in 3 months and I'll tell you no.
I love the guy's aspirations. I mean, he had a real drive to not do anything.
Yeah, fucking. Yeah, at a certain, like, I hate him, but he's the type.
But you admire him too.
Yeah, he's a real Saul Goodman type character in history. So, well done, you piece of shit.
They injected him full of ether so he could come back to life and commit seppuku.
Yeah, seriously, you could have learned something from Mishima, you son of a bitch.
It's rather amazing if he's fucking around with all this like compressed air, like secret hidden compressed air the whole time, that he never blew himself up.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, obviously not like fiery explosion. That's not how compressed air works, but like shrapnel through the throat.
Right.
But
yeah.
Anyway, so that's what I have.
Great. That's what a fucker.
We do tend to highlight a bunch of bad people, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah, Mishima was just like generally kind of crazy. So in an odd way, he's probably like the most likable of the fucking people we've talked about. And even him, he was like, he kidnapped a guy before he did all this shit.
In fairness, though, it sounds like a relatively kind kid. I get that they choked him out and tied him up, but it's not like they like beat him and tortured him. There's just like, we need to tie this dude to a chair. That way I can give myself.
Yeah, so I can give my great speech, and then they go outside and like, you're an asshole. Well, fuck.
It's weird. They seem to be mad that I kidnapped one of their comrades.
It's like being like an open micer and like having to open for like an established comedian, and like you get out before you can even get anything out. It's like, bring out Dunham.
Well, but it's almost more like the being an established comedian about to take the stage, and then you throw such a fit about it being an open mic night that you force them to let you on stage, fully expecting the crowd to be behind you.
We want to see some amateur comedy, don't we, guys? No, fuck off.
Well, do you want to see me disembowel myself and get whacked a few times? Well, maybe.
I mean, yeah, but not right now, no. In a general sense, I want that to happen to you, but no, I don't want to watch right now. We want you to leave.
God, can you imagine being the guy back on yours? I'm stuck on being the guy that they kidnapped, because at that point...
Yeah, and you just have to watch these fucking bumbling shitheads.
But you would also be terrified, because if they're fucking doing that to themselves and they kidnapped you without a clear reason for kidnapping you, my mind would be on the whole time like, what the fuck is going on? What are they going to do to me? Like,
yeah.
And then they're like, oh, well, to you, we plan on untying you. And you're like, oh.
Huh. This is some plan, guys.
Are you sure you don't want to like punch me at least?
You guys know that just because he wrote a bunch of letters saying that it was his fault doesn't mean you're not going to get charged, right?
Oh, wait, I should have waited till they untie me to say that. Fuck. Yeah. I mean, yeah, we'll let you go.
Yeah. I imagine there was like a whole, like, can you imagine like he comes home from work that day?
How was your day, honey? Well, breakfast was pretty good.
I watched a man just fucking die the worst.
Oh man, heart attack or seizure? Nope.
His friend kept hitting him with a sword. And Jesus. So yeah.
Hopefully you guys aren't as scarred as that general had to be, but
or maybe that's what you need, huh? A little darkness in your life. That's what Mishima was all about.
His plan succeeded.
Yeah, come back next week for more darkness and the comedy that lies in the darkness. I feel really weird laughing at that shit, but it's so funny. Yeah. Like just
it gets easier. I mean, I had that guy a couple of episodes back with the Arctic expedition, and you're like, his fucking skin fell off.
Yeah.
So it's not funny, haha. It's funny, oh my god.
It's funny, like, good God. End humanity now. That's episode 7.
As always, thanks for listening, and we hope to see you back next week, which is weird because we don't see you at all, but you know what I mean.
I see you. I see what you're trying to do. Listening to our show, trying to sabotage us. You can find the official Twitter for the podcast at nonessentialpod, and the nonessential.libsyn. Is it Libsyn? I always get that wrong.
Libsyn, because it's short for Liberated Syndication, so Libsyn.
Okay. So yeah, the nonessential.libsyn.com. That's the official site or whatever. We're on Spotify. We're on YouTube. We're on iTunes. We're everywhere.
Mm-hmm. And we're fucking hilarious. Like, so follow us.
That's a great commercial.
Yeah.
The Non-Essential Podcast. We're fucking hilarious. It's when we break into local radio.
And then we flash back to that part at the beginning of the show where I say, if you say something non-genuine, people pick up on it. But whatever.
Yeah, if it's self-congratulatory, we don't mean it.